Part 1, Chapter 3 of the Story of the Barbary Corsairs, by Stanley Lane-Poole. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista. Part 1, The Corsair Admirals. Chapter 3, Urūj Barbarossa, 1504 to 1515. The island of Lesbos has given many gifts to the world: lesbian wine and lesbian verse, the seven-stringed lyre, and the poems of Sappho. But of all its products the latest was assuredly the most questionable, for the last great lesbians were the brothers Barbarossa. When Sultan Mohammed II conquered the island in 1462, he left there a certain Sepehi soldier named Ya'qūb. So say the Turkish annalists, but the Spanish writers claim him as a native Christian, who became the father of Urūj Barbarossa and his brother Kheyr ed-Dīn. Various stories are told of their early career, and the causes which led to their taking to the sea. But as Lesbos had long been famous for its buccaneers, whether indigenous or importations from Catalonia and Aragon, there was nothing unusual in the brothers adopting a profession which was alike congenial to bold hearts and sanctioned by time-honored precedent. Urūj the elder soon became the reïs, or captain, of a galleot, and finding his operations hampered in the archipelago by the predominance of the Sultan's fleet, he determined to seek a wider and less interrupted field for his depredations. Rumours had reached the Levant of the successes of the Moorish pirates. Prodigious tales were abroad as to great argosies, laden with the treasures of the New World, passing and repassing the narrow seas between Europe and Africa, and seeming to invite capture. And it was not long, 1504, before Captain Urūj found himself cruising with 2 galleots off the Barbary coast, and spying out the land in search of a good harbour and a safe refuge from pursuit. The port of Tunis offered all that a Corsair could wish. The Goletta, in those days, was but slightly fortified, and the principal building, besides the castle, was the custom house, where the wealth of the many nations was taxed by the Sultan of the House of Hafs. The very sight of such an institution was stimulating to a pirate. Urūj paid his court to the King of Tunis, and speedily came to an understanding with him on the subject of royalties on stolen goods. The ports of Tunis were made free to the Corsair, and the king would protect him from pursuit, for the consideration of a fixed share, a fifth, of the booty. The policy of the enlightened rulers of Tunis evidently no longer suited their latest representative. The base of operations thus secured, Urūj did not keep his new ally long waiting for a proof of his prowess. One day he lay off the island of Elba, when 2 galleys royal, belonging to His Holiness Pope Julius II, richly laden with goods from Genoa and bound for Cività Vecchia, hove in sight. They were rowing in an easy, leisurely manner, little dreaming of Turkish Corsairs, for none such had ever been seen in those waters, nor anything bigger than a Moorish brigantine, of which the Papal marines were prepared to give a good account. So the 2 galleys paddled on, some 10 leagues asunder, and Urūj Reïs marked his prey down. It was no light adventure for a galleot of 18 banks of oars to board a royal galley of perhaps twice her size, and with no one could tell how many armed men inside her. The Turkish crew remonstrated at such foolhardiness, and begged their captain to look for a foe of their own size. But for reply Urūj only cast most of the oars overboard, and thus made escape impossible. Then he lay to and awaited the foremost galley. She came on proudly, unconscious of danger. Suddenly her lookout spied Turkish turbans, a strange sight on the Italian coast, and in a panic of confusion her company beat to arms. The vessels were now alongside, and a smart volley of shot and bolts completed the consternation of the Christians. Urūj and his men were quickly on the poop, and His Holiness's servants were soon safe under hatches. Never before had a galley royal struck her colours to a mere galleot, but worse was to follow. Urūj declared he must and would have her consort. In vain his officers showed him how temerarious was the venture, and how much more prudent it would be to make off with one rich prize than to court capture by over greediness. The Corsair's will was of iron, and his crew, inflated with triumph, caught his audacious spirit. They clothed themselves in the dresses of the Christian prisoners, and manned the subdued galley as though they were her own seamen. On came the consort, utterly ignorant of what had happened, till a shower of arrows and small shot aroused her, just in time to be carried by assault, before her men had collected their senses. Urūj brought his prizes into the Goletta. Never was such a sight seen there before. "The wonder and astonishment," says Haedo, "that this noble exploit caused in Tunis, and even in Christendom, is not to be expressed, nor how celebrated the name of Urūj Reïs has become from that very moment, he being held and accounted by all the world as a most valiant and enterprising commander. And by reason his beard was extremely red, or carroty. From thenceforward he was generally called Barba Rossa, which in Italian signifies red beard." The capture of the Papal galleys gave Urūj what he wanted, rowers. He kept his Turks for fighting, and made the Christian prisoners work the oars. Such was the custom of every Corsair down to the present century, and the Christian navies were similarly propelled by Mohammedan slaves. The practice must have lent a strange excitement to the battle, for then assuredly a man's foes were of his own household. A Venetian admiral knew well that his 200 or 300 galley slaves were panting to break their irons and join the enemy, and the Turkish Corsair had also his unwilling subjects, who would take the first chance to mutiny in favour of the Christian adversary. Thus it often happened that a victory was secured by the strong arms of the enemy's chained partisans, who would have given half their lives to promote a defeat. But the sharp lash of the boatswain, who walked the bridge between the banks of rowers, was a present and acute argument which few backs could withstand. Urūj made his first coup, and he did not hesitate to follow it up. Next year he captured a Spanish ship with 500 soldiers on board, who were all so seasick or spent with pumping out the leaky vessel that they fell an easy prey to his galleots. Before 5 years were out, what with cruising and building with the timber of his many prizes, he had 8 good vessels at his back, with 2 of his brothers to help. The port of Tunis now hardly sufficed his wants, so he established himself temporarily on the fertile island of Jerba, and from its ample anchorage his ships issued forth to harry the coasts of Italy. To be king of Jerba was all too small a title for his ambition. He aimed at sovereignty on a large scale, and, Corsair as he was by nature, he wished for settled power almost as much as he delighted in adventure. In 1512 the opportunity he sought arrived. 3 years before, the Mohammedan king of Bujēya had been driven out of his city by the Spaniards, and the exiled potentate appealed to the Corsair to come and restore him, coupling the petition with promises of the free use of Bujēya port, whence the command of the Spanish sea was easily to be held. Urūj was pleased with the prospect, and as he had now 12 galleots with cannon and 1,000 Turkish men at arms, to say nothing of renegades and Moors, he felt strong enough for the attempt. The renown of his exploits had spread far and wide, and there was no lack of a following from all parts of the Levant when it was known that Urūj Reïs was on the war path. His extraordinary energy and impetuosity called forth a corresponding zeal in his men, and, like other dashing commanders, he was very popular. Well supported, and provided with such a siege train as the times permitted, he landed before Bujēya in August 1512, and found the dethroned king expecting him at the head of 3,000 mountain Berbers. The Spanish garrison was collected in the strong bastion which the Count Don Pedro Navarro had fortified when he took the city, and for 8 days the fortress withstood the battering of the Corsairs' ordnance. Just when a breach began to be opened, Urūj was disabled. A shot took his left arm away above the elbow. In the absence of their leader's heroic example, the Turks felt little confidence in their superiority to Spanish steel. They preferred carrying their wounded captain to the surgeons at Tunis. Bougia, for the moment, escaped, but the Corsairs enjoyed some little consolation in the capture of a rich Genoese galleot which they met on its voyage to the Lomellini's mart at Tabarka. With this spoil, Urūj returned to recover from his wound, while his brother, Kheyr ed Dīn, kept guard over the castle of the Goletta, and began to bring the galleots and prizes through the canal into the Lake of Tunis, where they would be safe from pursuit. He was too late, however. The Senate of Genoa was highly incensed at the loss of the galleot, and Andrea Doria, soon to be known as the greatest Christian admiral of his time, was dispatched with 12 galleys to exact reparation. He landed before the Goletta, and drove Kheyr ed Dīn before him into Tunis. The fortress was sacked, and half Barbarossa's ships were brought in triumph to Genoa. Thus ended the first meeting between Doria and Kheyr ed Dīn. The next was less happy for the noble Genoese. Kheyr ed Dīn, well aware of his brother's fierce humour, did not dare to face him after this humiliation, but left him to fume impotently in his sick room, while he stole away to Jerba, there to work night and day at shipbuilding. Urūj joined him in the following spring. The king of Tunis had probably had enough of him, and they soon had the means of wiping out their disgrace. The attempt was at first a failure. A second assault on the ominous forts of Bougia (1514) was on the point of success, when reinforcements arrived from Spain. The Berber allies evinced more interest in getting in their crops after the rain than in forcing the bastion, and Barbarossa, compelled to raise the siege in a frantic rage, tearing his red beard like a madman, set fire to his ships that they might not fall into the hands of the Spaniards. He would not show himself now in Tunis or Jerba. Some new spot must shelter him after this fresh reverse. On his way to and from Bougia, he had noticed the very place for his purpose, a spot easy to defend, perched on inaccessible rocks, yet furnished with a good harbour, where the losses of recent years might be repaired. This was Jījil, some 60 miles to the east of Bougia, whose sturdy inhabitants owed allegiance to no sultan, but were proud to welcome so renowned, although now so unfortunate, a warrior as Barbarossa. So at Jījil Urūj dwelt, and cultivated a good will of the people with spoils of corn and goods from his cruisers, till those indomitable African mountaineers, who had never owned a superior, chose him by acclamation their king. End of Part 1, Chapter 3. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista.